Naomi Bridges felt the porcelain teapot tremble once against its tray, and she steadied it with 2 fingers before anyone in the room could notice. She had learned in her first week at the Han estate that noise was a kind of confession. A dropped spoon, a rattled cup, a footstep too heavy on the marble stairs. Silence was survival here, and she had become fluent in it. She moved through the receiving hall with her eyes down and her spine straight, the tea tray balanced against her forearm, steam curling from 4 cups arranged with military precision. 4 sisters sat along the long lacquered table like pieces set out for inspection. The Okonkwo daughters, brought from 3 different corners of the city by their father in the hope that one of them might become Mrs. Han. Naomi had heard the staff whispering about it for a week. A merger disguised as a marriage. An empire looking to expand its reach through a bloodline instead of a bullet. She set the first cup in front of the eldest sister, who did not look up from her phone. The second sister accepted hers with a tight, performative smile, the kind reserved for people who did not matter enough to earn a real one. The third sister ignored her tea altogether, too busy adjusting the neckline of her dress in the reflection of the window glass. Naomi had grown used to being furniture in rooms like this. It did not sting anymore. Mostly. She was reaching for the 4th cup when the doors at the end of the hall opened without a sound, and the temperature of the room changed before anyone announced him. Jinho Han did not walk into a room so much as claim it. He wore black, the kind of black that costs more than Naomi made in 4 months, tailored so precisely it looked less like clothing and more like a second skin stitched by someone who feared him. His hair was dark and combed back with deliberate carelessness, and his eyes, when they finally moved across the room, were the pale, unsettling gray of river ice in winter. There was a thin white scar along his jaw, barely visible unless the light caught it right, and it caught it now as he turned his head. The sisters straightened in their seats like puppets pulled upright by the same string. Naomi kept pouring. "Mr. Han," the eldest sister said, rising halfway from her chair before catching herself and sitting back down, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt. He did not answer her. He crossed the room with unhurried steps, his shoes silent against the marble, and Naomi felt him behind her before she heard him, a presence like pressure change before a storm. She kept her eyes on the teapot in her hands, on the thin gold line where the porcelain met the lid, on anything that was not him. "Leave the tray," he said. The voice was low, and it was not directed at the sisters. It was directed at her. Naomi's hands went still. In 3 months of service in this house, Jinho Han had never once spoken to her directly. She was the maid who refilled his study's whiskey decanter at midnight and swept the ash from his private terrace at dawn. She was invisible by design, and invisibility had kept her safe. "Sir?" The word came out steadier than she felt. "The tray," he said again, gesturing once with 2 fingers toward the low table beside him. "Here, not there." She obeyed, because obedience was the only current that moved safely through this house, and she set the tray down exactly where he indicated, close enough now that she could smell him, cedar and something colder underneath it, like the air right before snow. She straightened and stepped back, expecting to be dismissed, expecting the sisters' eyes to bore twin holes into the back of her uniform for daring to be looked at first. Instead, Jinho Han looked directly at her, and the room seemed to lose its air. "What is your name?" he said. Not a question. A demand dressed as one. "Naomi," she said. "Naomi Bridges, sir." He studied her face the way a man studies a ledger he suspects has been falsified, searching for the number that does not add up. The third sister let out a small, sharp laugh, the kind meant to remind everyone present of the natural order of things. "She's staff," the third sister said, as though correcting an obvious error. "You asked to meet the Okonkwo daughters." "I did," Jinho said, still looking at Naomi. "I am looking at one of them now." The words landed in the room like a dropped glass, and for a moment nobody moved. Naomi felt the heat crawl up her neck, felt every eye in the room shift toward her with a violence that no one bothered to disguise. She understood, in that instant, that whatever quiet, careful life she had built for herself in this house had just ended, and something far more dangerous had begun in its place. The summons came 2 hours later, delivered by Jinho's personal assistant, a compact man named Doyen who spoke in clipped sentences and never made eye contact for longer than necessary. Naomi was told to report to the West Wing study at 7 o'clock and to say nothing to anyone about it beforehand. She spent the 2 hours in the servants' quarters trying to convince herself it was a mistake. Perhaps he wanted to reprimand her for the misstep with the tray. Perhaps someone had complained about her, invented some infraction to have her removed before she embarrassed the sisters further. She rehearsed apologies in the small mirror above her dresser, practiced the posture of a woman who understood her place. None of it prepared her for the study itself. It was a room built entirely of dark wood and low light, shelves lined with books Naomi doubted anyone had read, a single lamp burning gold over a desk of black stone. Jinho sat behind it with his jacket removed, sleeves rolled to the forearm, revealing more of the ink she had heard the other staff whisper about but had never confirmed with her own eyes. It climbed from his wrist and disappeared beneath his cuff, dark shapes she could not name in the dim light. "Sit," he said, without looking up from the papers in front of him. She sat. Her hands folded themselves in her lap, without her permission. "You've worked in this house 3 months," he said. "Yes, sir." "Before this house?" "I worked for a private catering company. Before that, I was in school for hospitality management. I had to leave when my mother got sick." She did not know why she offered that last part. It was not asked for. Something about the stillness of the room seemed to pull honesty out of her like thread from a spool. He finally looked up. "Is she well now?"
"She passed
8 months ago." Something moved behind his eyes, brief and gone before she could name it. "I am sorry," he said, and it did not sound like the empty courtesy she had heard from 100 other mouths in this house. It sounded like a man setting something down carefully because he understood its weight. "Why am I here?" Naomi asked before she could stop herself. It was not her place to question him, and she braced for the correction. It did not come. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and studied her again, the same searching look from the receiving hall. "My father built alliances through marriages," he said. He believed loyalty could be manufactured through bloodlines. "I watched 3 of his arrangements collapse into war because the woman at the center of them wanted nothing to do with the man she was given to. I do not intend to repeat his mistakes. I don't understand what that has to do with me. The Okonkwo daughters were brought here to be evaluated like livestock at auction," he said, and there was something cold and precise in the way he said it, a contempt aimed not at the sisters, but at the entire performance itself. "I have sat through 6 of these arrangements this year. 6 women who smiled at me the way people smile at men they're afraid of, or men they want something from. You are the first person in this house in 3 months who has looked at me like I might be dangerous rather than useful." Naomi's throat tightened. "You are dangerous." "Yes," he said simply, no defense in it, no denial. "I am. And you understood that immediately, which is more than any of the 4 women sitting in my receiving hall have managed. That doesn't mean I want to be part of whatever this is." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. But I am not asking you to marry me, Miss Bridges. I am asking you to have dinner with me tomorrow evening. What happens after that is a conversation, not an arrangement."
She should have said no.
She turned the word over in her mind, tested its shape, prepared it on her tongue. What came out instead surprised her more than it should have. "I have a shift until 9. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something more contained. "Then I will wait until 9. Dinner was not dinner in any sense Naomi recognized. It was held in a private dining room on the 3rd floor she had cleaned 100 times without ever seeing it occupied, the long table stripped down to 2 settings at one end, candlelight instead of the chandelier's cold glare. Jinho stood when she entered, which unsettled her more than anything he had said in his study. Men like him did not stand for women like her. "You didn't change," he observed, glancing at her uniform, which she had not had time to shed before Doyen appeared at her door with instructions. "I didn't think this was optional." "Everything with me is optional," he said. "That is the part everyone in this house forgets." They ate in a silence that was not uncomfortable so much as unfamiliar, and Naomi found herself watching his hands more than she meant to, the precision with which he moved, nothing wasted, nothing careless. She thought of what the housekeeper, an older woman named Priya, who had worked for the Han family for 11 years, had told her in a hushed voice on her first day. He is not a man who raises his voice. He does not need to. The men who cross him do not get a second conversation. You're staring, Jinho said, without looking up from his glass. I'm trying to understand you. Most people don't bother trying. They assume the suit and the silence are the whole story. Aren't they? He set his glass down with a soft, deliberate click against the table. My older brother was meant to run this family. I was meant to run the shipping side of the business and stay out of the rest of it. He was better at this than I ever wanted to be. Better at the violence, better at the patience it requires. What happened to him? He trusted a lieutenant who had been with our father for 20 years. The lieutenant sold information to a rival organization in Busan. My brother walked into a meeting that was supposed to be a peace negotiation. It was an execution. His voice did not change registers, did not rise or crack, but something in the stillness of his face told her the wound was not old in the way he wanted it to be. I inherited everything I did not train for, including the responsibility of finding the people who did it. Did you find them? All but one, he said, and something in the flatness of his tone told her that particular thread was not finished, that it was still pulling somewhere beneath the surface of this house. I do not discuss business at dinner, Miss Bridges. I made an exception because you asked, and because I suspect you are the only person in this house who would ask a question like that and actually want the true answer instead of the safe one. She held his gaze, and for the first time since the receiving hall, she let herself really look at him, not as a source of danger to be managed, but as a man who had built a wall so total that a woman with a tea tray had somehow found its one unguarded seam. I don't know what you want from me, she admitted. Neither do I entirely, Jinho said. But I intend to find out. The days that followed blurred into something Naomi could not have predicted a week earlier. She still worked her shifts, still folded linens and polished silver, and swept the terrace at dawn, but Jinho found reasons to be in the rooms she was in. He asked her opinion on business correspondence he had no obligation to share with staff. He remembered, without being told twice, that she took her coffee black and her tea with too much honey. Small things. Deniable things. The kind of attention that could be explained away as courtesy if anyone asked, and everyone was asking. The Okonkwo sisters had not left. Their father, a businessman named Chibuzo Okonkwo, who ran a logistics empire that fed half the ports on the western coast, was not a man who accepted rejection gracefully, and he had made it clear through Doyen that his daughters would remain as guests until Jinho made his intentions known. The third sister, whose name Naomi had learned was Ifeoma, had taken to watching her with an open hostility that required no interpretation. You should be careful, Ifeoma said one afternoon, cornering Naomi in the linen closet with the practiced menace of a woman who had spent her whole life getting what she wanted. Men like him do not marry the help. He is entertaining himself. When he is finished, you will still be folding sheets, and my sister will still be his wife. Naomi did not answer. She had learned that silence disarmed people like Ifeoma faster than argument ever could. But the words lodged themselves somewhere behind her ribs anyway, because they were not wrong about how this house worked, only wrong about what Jinho intended. The real danger arrived 3 nights later, and it did not announce itself the way Naomi expected danger to. She was crossing the East Garden after midnight, sent to deliver a message from the kitchen staff to Doyen about a delivery scheduled for dawn, when she heard the first gunshot. It came from the direction of the front gate, sharp and flat against the night air, followed almost immediately by a second, and then the sound of men shouting in a language she did not speak but understood perfectly through tone alone.
Fear.
Chaos. Command. She froze in the middle of the garden path, every instinct in her body screaming at her to run toward the house, and it was that instinct that saved her, because a hand closed around her wrist an instant later and pulled her hard into the shadow of the garden wall. Jinho's body came down over hers, pressing her flat against the stone, his weight a shield between her and the open lawn. She could feel his heartbeat through his shirt, steady, far too steady for a man under fire, and the scent of cedar and gunpowder filled the small space between them. Do not move, he said against her ear, low enough that only she could hear it. Do not make a sound. More gunfire, closer now, and the sound of men running across gravel. Naomi's hands found the front of his shirt without her permission, fisting into the fabric, and he did not pull away from the grip. If anything, his arm tightened around her, angling his own body more fully into the path of whatever might come around the corner of that wall. "Who is it?" she whispered. "Someone who wants to remind me that Busan has a long memory," he said, and there was something almost calm in his voice, the calm of a man who had lived inside violence long enough to no longer be surprised by its arrival. "Stay behind me." He rose in one motion, pulling a weapon from beneath his jacket that Naomi had not known he was carrying, and moved toward the sound of the fighting with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything else. She watched him disappear around the hedge and felt something in her chest crack open. Not fear exactly, though there was plenty of that, but something closer to helpless fury at being told to stay still while he walked toward gunfire alone. She did not stay still. Naomi moved along the garden wall in the opposite direction, toward the kitchen entrance, where she knew a service door led to a stairwell that came out near the front gate from an angle no one would expect. She did not have a plan beyond getting eyes on what was happening, beyond refusing to be the woman who hid in the dark while people she had begun, against every warning in her own head, to care about were bleeding somewhere she could not see. The stairwell was narrow and unlit, and Naomi took the steps two at a time, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. When she emerged near the front gate, the fighting had already thinned into something quieter and more final. 3 men in dark clothing on the ground. Jinho's security team fanned out across the drive with weapons still raised, and Jinho himself standing at the center of it, unmarked, his jacket discarded somewhere in the chaos, blood on his knuckles that was not his own. He turned and saw her immediately, and something violent crossed his face, not anger at the intruders, but something sharper, more personal. "I told you to stay behind the wall. I wasn't going to hide while you walked into that alone. That is precisely what you were meant to do." "I don't take orders well," she said, and despite everything, despite the bodies on the ground and the adrenaline still shaking through her hands, something in his expression shifted, softened by a fraction, so small most people would have missed it entirely. Doyen approached at a jog, speaking rapidly in low tones, and Jinho's attention split away from her toward the report, his face resuming its careful neutrality. Naomi caught fragments. A name. A location. The word traitor, spoken with a weight that told her this was not a random attack, but the closing of a door that had been left open a long time. "Take her inside," Jinho said to one of his men, not looking at Naomi as he said it, already moving toward the gate with Doyen at his shoulder. "And find out how they knew which gate had the weakest coverage tonight." The implications settled over the estate like frost. Someone inside the house had told them. The interior of the house had transformed by morning into something colder than Naomi had ever felt it. Security doubled at every entrance. Staff questioned one by one in the small parlor off the kitchen. The sisters confined to their wing under guard that was, everyone understood without being told, less about their protection than their suspicion. Naomi was questioned too, briefly, by a man named Sunwoo who worked security and asked his questions with the flat efficiency of someone who did not enjoy the process, but would not skip a step of it. She was released without incident, but the incident had already done its damage. Ifeoma found her in the hallway outside the kitchen that evening, and this time there was no pretense of civility in her voice. "They're saying someone let those men through the gate," Ifeoma said. "Do you know how convenient it would be if it turned out to be the maid he has been chasing around this house? Removes as little distraction and answers his question in one stroke." "I had nothing to do with it." "I know that," Ifeoma said, and something in her voice made Naomi go still, because it was not hostility this time, it was fear, badly hidden. "But it does not matter what I know. My father needs this marriage to happen. If you become an inconvenient explanation for what happened last night, I do not think anyone in this house would fight very hard to stop it from being decided that way." Naomi found Jinho in his study an hour later, and she did not wait to be summoned this time. She pushed the door open without knocking, and he looked up from the papers spread across his desk with an expression that shifted, briefly, into something like relief before the mask reasserted itself. "MIA suspect," she said, no preamble, no softening. No, he said immediately. But someone would find it convenient if I were. His jaw tightened, and he set down the pen in his hand with deliberate care, the same care he brought to everything, as though the wrong amount of force might break something he could not afford to lose. The information that got those men through my gate came from someone who has worked inside these walls for years. It did not come from a woman who has been here 3 months and spends her nights folding linen instead of meeting with rival organizations. That's not what I asked. I know exactly what is happening in this house, Naomi, he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name without the formality attached to it, and the sound of it in his mouth did something to her chest she did not have the composure to examine right then. I know who benefits from you becoming a convenient scapegoat, and I promise you, they will not get the chance. You can't protect me and run this investigation at the same time. Watch me, he said, and there was no arrogance in it, only certainty, the kind of certainty that came from a man who had never once failed to do what he said he would. She should have left it there. Instead, she crossed the room and stood on the opposite side of his desk, close enough now that she could see the exhaustion beneath his composure, the toll last night had taken on a man who wore control like armor. Why does it matter to you this much, she asked, what I am to this house? Why does it matter what happens to me? He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she thought he might not answer at all. Because for the first time since my brother died, he said finally, there is someone in this house I am afraid of losing. And I do not know what to do with that, because I have spent 7 years making sure I never had anything left that could be taken from me. The confession sat between them in the lamplight, and Naomi understood, with a clarity that frightened her, that she had crossed some threshold she could not walk back from. She had told herself for days that this was survival, proximity mistaken for feeling, the natural result of 2 people thrown into danger together. She understood now that she had been lying to herself the entire time. I should go, she said, though she did not move. You should, he agreed, and did not move either. Neither of them left. The distance between them closed by inches, not by decision so much as inevitability, and when he finally reached out and touched her jaw with 2 fingers, the same precision he brought to everything, she did not pull away. His hand was warm despite the cold efficiency of the man, and up close, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes had a different quality now, something raw beneath the careful control. I am not a safe thing to want, he said quietly. I never asked for safe. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the violence of the night before, nothing like the sharp efficiency he brought to every other part of his life. It was careful, deliberate, a question asked with his mouth instead of his voice, and when she answered it by pulling him closer, something in him seemed to release, some held breath he had been carrying for longer than she could guess. They broke apart slowly, and he pressed his forehead to hers, his hand still cradling her jaw. This does not solve anything, he said. The traitor is still inside these walls. Okonkwo will not release his daughters gracefully. Busan will send more men before this is finished. I know, Naomi said. But I'm not walking away from it. Or from you. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, and for the first time since she had met him, Jinho Han looked, briefly, like a man instead of an institution. Then we finish it together, he said. All of it. The traitor's identity surfaced 2 days later, and it was not the revelation the household expected. It was Sunwoo, the head of security, who had questioned Naomi with such clinical detachment, a man who had served the Han family for 6 years and had, according to the ledgers Doyen uncovered in a private account, been paid in increasing sums by a shell company traced back to the Busan organization for the last 18 months. Jinho called a meeting of his inner circle in the study that evening, and Naomi, who had no formal place in that room, was asked to stand at his side anyway, a decision that sent a ripple of unspoken understanding through everyone present. The maid was no longer simply staff. Whatever she had become to Jinho Han, it was no longer deniable. Sunwoo did not deny the accusation when it was laid in front of him. He simply looked around the room with the flat resignation of a man who had known, from the moment the gate breach failed to kill its intended target, that his time had run out. They offered enough to disappear, Sunwoo said. A new name. A new country. I have a daughter in Daegu who needed medical care. I could not afford on what this family paid me. Something flickered across Jinho's face, not sympathy exactly, but a recognition of the desperation that had made a loyal man into a traitor, and Naomi watched him weigh it, watched the calculation behind his pale eyes. You will tell us everything you gave them, Jinho said. Every detail, every contact, every plan they have shared with you. In exchange, your daughter's care will be paid for the remainder of her life, through channels that cannot be traced back to either of us. And me? Sunwoo asked quietly. You betrayed my house, Jinho said, and his voice did not rise, did not need to. There is a price for that. But your daughter did not choose her father's mistakes, and I do not make children pay for the sins of the people who are meant to protect them. The meeting ended with Sunwoo in custody, and the outline of Busan's plan laid bare across Jinho's desk. They intended a second attempt, larger this time, timed to coincide with a shipment negotiation 3 nights away, when security would be stretched thin across 2 properties instead of concentrated at the estate. We use it, Naomi said, before she had fully thought the idea through, and every head in the room turned toward her. If they think their information is still good, if they think Sunwoo is still feeding them intelligence, we control what they think they know. Let them walk into the timing we choose instead of the one they planned. Jinho looked at her for a long moment, something like pride moving behind the calculation in his eyes. She's right, he said, and the room, whatever hesitation it had carried about a maid speaking in a war council, adjusted itself around that certainty. The night of the ambush arrived heavy with a humidity that made the air feel solid, and Naomi stood in the estate's security room beside Doyen, watching a bank of monitors that showed every gate and hallway of the property in grainy green light. Jinho had wanted her kept far from the confrontation itself, and for once she had agreed, not out of obedience, but out of the understanding that her value here was in the plan they had built together, not in standing in a line of fire that did not need her in it. The trap worked exactly as they had designed it. Busan's men arrived through the service gate Sunwoo had fed them as vulnerable, only to find it sealed and reinforced, and by the time they understood the information had been turned against them, Jinho's people had already closed the perimeter behind them. Naomi watched on the monitors as the confrontation unfolded, brief and brutal and entirely one-sided, Jinho at the center of it moving with the same lethal precision she had seen in the garden days before, except this time she understood what she was looking at was not just violence, it was a man protecting something he had decided was worth protecting, and doing it without hesitation. It was over in minutes. When Jinho returned to the house, his shirt torn at the shoulder, Naomi met him at the door, and neither of them said anything for a long moment, the silence carrying more than words could have. It's finished, he said finally. Busan's man in the field is dead. The organization will not send another team so soon after losing this much on a single attempt. This house is safe. And the Okonkwo family. Chibuzo Okonkwo will take his daughters home tomorrow, Jinho said. I informed him this morning that I have made my choice, and it is not one of his daughters. Naomi felt the words settle over her like something solid finally locking into place. You told him. I told him the truth, Jinho said. That I do not intend to build my house on an arrangement designed to manufacture loyalty, because I have already found something no arrangement could have given me. Someone who chose to stay when leaving would have been easier and safer, and who has more courage in her than every soldier I employ. Word spread through the estate by morning the way it always did, faster than any official announcement, and by the time the Okonkwo family departed in a convoy of black cars, every member of the household staff understood precisely what had shifted within those walls. Ifeoma paused at the door long enough to look at Naomi across the courtyard, and there was no venom left in her expression, only something that might have been, in another life, respect. I hope it was worth it, Ifeoma said. Whatever this is. It wasn't a choice I made for convenience, Naomi said. It was one I made because I wanted to. The cars pulled away, and the estate settled into a quiet Naomi had not felt within its walls since her first week of employment, a quiet that no longer felt like something to fear. Jinho found her later that afternoon in the garden where the first gunfire had found them both, and he did not say anything at first, simply stood beside her and looked out over the grounds his family had held for 3 generations, grounds that had nearly become a grave more than once in the past week. "I built this house on the assumption that I would always stand in it alone," he said. "That love was a liability I could not afford, the way my brother could not afford his trust. I do not know how to do this. I have not allowed myself to want something that could be used against me in a very long time." "I'm not asking you to know how," Naomi said. "I'm asking you to try." He turned to face her fully, and the pale ice of his eyes had warmed into something Naomi had not seen in them before, something unguarded. "Then I am asking you to stay. Not as staff. Not as an arrangement. As the woman I intend to build the rest of this house around, however long that takes to prove to you." Naomi thought of her mother, who had not lived to see her daughter find a version of safety that looked nothing like what either of them had imagined, and she thought of the tea tray she had carried into that receiving hall 3 weeks ago, certain she was invisible, certain her place in this house had already been decided for her. "I'm staying," she said, "because I want to, not because anyone chose it for me." He reached for her hand, and this time there was no calculation in the gesture at all, only a man finally allowing himself to hold on to something he had convinced himself he could not keep. If you have made it this far into this story, you already know what it feels like to fall for someone the world told you was too dangerous to want. Let us know in the comments whether Naomi made the right choice standing beside Jinho instead of running from him, and tell us which sister's reaction hit hardest for you. If you want more stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next dangerous, slow-burning romance we bring to life. Thank you for listening, and we will see you in the next story.